Okay, so welcome everyone to the Chaos OSPO working group meeting for Thursday, March 5th. So thank you all for coming. We do have a really quick chair update, which I will add in the notes. So many of you probably remember Gary White, who was the co-chair with me for this working group, and he has not been around lately. It's for a very good reason. Him and his wife had a baby, and so he's been on paternity leave. So he's just been kind of absent. And so I talked to him about it a little bit, and he's welcome to come back at any time. But it would be nice to have some co-chairs so that I don't have to run all of the meetings. And so we have two new co-chairs. So thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Alan. So the three of us will now be co-chairing this working group. So I'm super happy to have both of you on board. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have some new chairs. So I think this is great.
Thank you for inviting
Okay.
us.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, excited to be more involved in the OSPO working group meetings. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. And part of what spurred a lot of this is that I'm planning on taking most of April and or all of April and most of May off. So this is really timely because I'm definitely going to need some people to run the meeting while I'm gone. So Alan and Natalia have stepped up to do that. So I'm super excited. And I'll put some notes in the chair update in the minutes, which I meant to do before. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Cornelius, and you can take it from here.
Yeah, thanks. I'm here today kind of on behalf of the to-do groups, working group on the business guide, as we call it, open source in business. And I want to share some of the work we have done there and discuss ideas how to go about it. So on one hand, that you are aware of what is happening there, but also that we get into a discussion about how we could continue with it, especially with an eye on metrics. We had the discussion a couple of times, but it's not as easy as it yeah would be good. So we'll get to that. I have brought a presentation, so let me try to share that. So you see my slides now?
Yeah, looks good.
Perfect. Good. So that's as an intro for our discussion. So given status, we call it, or this aspect, we call it the mechanics of open source in business. As I said, it's a working group as part of the to-do group. And we have started that, I think, 2 years ago already. There was a proposal to work on that. It came from some discussions we had within the to-do group about how we interact with business people in our organizations. And we realized that this is often not the usual discussion we have within our peer group of to-do people who often have a technical background, who sometimes have a legal background. Of course, there are also people who have a business background, but what we realized is that we sometimes lack the material which is tailored to this target group. And yeah, enough people found interest in writing something. So we made the formal proposal to create a working group as a subgroup in the to-do group to work on the open source and business guide. And the artifact, which is meant to result from that, is a white paper on open source and business. We have a GitHub repository or a part of the OSPology repository here, so I have the URL here. That's where all the material is we have created so far. And that's also what I will refer to. So what I tell you now, you can read the details there in the repository. The goal of the working group is twofold. On one hand, we want to do this community-driven guide, like many of the other to-do group guides. basically from within the group, more as helper for us to spread the word, to define the terms we use there, to write down the concepts, also discuss a bit about how this all fits together. So there, the target group would be more people working on OSPOs and related functions. But we also want to have another version, and we sometimes call it the enterprise edition of this, which is maybe a condensed guide. We still will have to see how the exact format will look like, which is directly targeted at business decision makers. What you could put on the desk of a CEO or a CFO or whatever of a company who is interested or at least open to using open source to accelerate their business. So the way how we structured that is we basically looked at two perspectives. One is first we try to identify the elements of how open source drives business. That's what we call the business drivers. And then in a second step, and I will show you that in a second, we looked at business models, how these drivers then are applied there. And for the guide, the plan is to have case studies where we look at concrete cases where we can show companies who actually have done it using open source successfully to improve, accelerate their business, make their business more profitable, and also write this down. I won't talk about that. We are not there yet. At the moment, we are at the mechanics. And the business drivers we identified there is this list here. The one which is probably the most widely used driver is adoption. So we know that open source is a great way to get adoption for software. If you have a popular open source project, this opens a lot of opportunities in many different ways. You can build a business on that, but you also can give it away for free and do something else with it, depending on your actual business model. So this wide adoption is one of the primary business drivers. It's also related to some others, but this is one we identified. Contributions are another driver because that gives you the leverage to actually change the software you are using, to influence the software which is on the market, to work with others. So this also is a driver which is important. Zero license costs is something which is, especially when you calculate business cases, something which can be quite significant. If you don't have to pay license fees for software, this opens up business opportunities which otherwise are difficult. Especially, for example, if you're in high volume markets where you would have to have a per device license fee. That's where open source is really effective and has changed quite some markets. Transparency and public benefit, these are two drivers which go more a little bit in a direction which is also harder to get, to grasp, also harder to measure. We will come to that at the end. But transparency obviously is one of the big values of open source in the sense of ethical values, but it also has business value in direct terms because people can actually verify their trust they have in you by looking at your code. And public benefit is similar. Obviously, we have this public money, public code mantra. If we invest public money in code, that this should be available to society. That makes a lot of sense, but that's also, it makes sense from an ethical point of view, also from an economical point of view, but that's already harder to explain. But it's definitely a driver which can be used to also take decisions. And volunteers, it's a little bit of a different quality of a driver because it's less than mechanic, but more the people who are driving the mechanics. But volunteers obviously play a very important role in open source because they do a lot of work, but also because we have to be careful with these volunteers because they add value, but they are not paid for it in most cases. So we have to deal with that in a respectful way. So also this has to be something which is taken into account in business models. So this is a list of drivers we identified. And now let's have a look at a couple of examples of business models. So this is not meant to be a complete list, but some examples we also used as a starting point to discuss what kind of case studies we want to look at. And the scheme is always the same. We basically look at the business model and then see what drivers are active there. I have some examples there. And the idea is to, we could, for example, do something like draw a business model canvas and see what are the open source dynamics in this business model canvas. Where are the connections? We could put some errors into that. We haven't done this work. That's an idea of what we want to work on in this working group. So as an example, kind of the classical open source business model, you sell support and maintenance for open source software. There are many examples where companies do that. And the drivers there, adoption is certainly one of the things which is very important there, because the more people use the open source software you support, the bigger your market is and the more potential customers are out there. So it helps you to make open source software successful, even if it's for free in terms of license fees. But then you have your service offerings around that. The model relies on contributions, because if I want to support open source software, I need to be able to change that, and it just would not be economically viable to do that without giving back. So contributions are a crucial element here. And the third one, zero license cost, that's also something which plays a role here, because it changes a little bit the dynamics of the market. Because as I said before, for example, in a market where you would pay license fees per device, there's zero license cost. Change the model, how you actually would sell to customers. Yeah, and examples, the typical examples are the Linux distributions. They do this model for many, many years, and it has proven to create a lot of value for these companies, but obviously also for many of the customers they have. Then another also kind of classical way to look at that is hosting software as a service. So if I have open source software and I need to run it to be able to use it, and it's software which is possible or advisable or can't be done in another way to run as a software as a service, then you have to host it. There open source opens up, and that's a zero licensing cost driver. You can actually provide hosting for software you don't own yourself, you have not developed yourself, but open source gives you all what you need to be able to offer that. Good for customers because there's competition in the market, but also good for the providers because they have the opportunity to do things without having to set up a huge software development effort. And adoption, again, is a driver here, which is important because that's defining the size of your market. Again, if many people use software, then and they need a service, need hosting or software as a service for that, then you will have a lot of customers. And examples we are looking at here, WordPress is one of the huge examples doing that, but also managed data services like Avon is doing it. Or one example from a specific domain, Instructure with Canvas, that's from the education area. They have a pretty successful company there, which is based on this model. And obviously, cloud providers are doing that in a kind of general way. They offer a lot of managed services on different levels also of management. And yeah, clearly there is business to be made there. But it's interesting to see that also the discussion there. I mean, how much open source is actually helpful for your business model? How much open source do you need? Maybe can it also be a problem because you have competition? I mean, we know the discussion about open source projects which change their license because they think cloud providers are extracting too much value from the market. It's an interesting discussion, and I mean, we don't have a conclusion here, but it would be interesting to look deeper into that and also to look at numbers. That's where we come to maybe also metrics or at least value assessment. Another business model we looked at is standardization. This is something where we often see open source especially successful in establishing de facto standards because the software is widely available, because it's transparent, because people with different interests can trust it, because they can see it. They all, stakeholders are on the same level. Their transparency is an important driver because that makes it easier to establish a standard because the trust which is related to that is kind of inherent in the model and is not something you have to buy or sell. And adoption, again, I think that's kind of the recurring theme here. Adoption always is accelerating business because the more people are interested, obviously, the bigger the market opportunities are. And examples we listed here. Android would be one example where Google established a new standard for mobile operating systems in the market, changed the market dynamic quite significantly. Here, it would be interesting to also analyze actually how open source what role open source plays there. I mean, Android obviously is open source. Maybe here is also the zero license costs in place, but yeah. It's definitely a dynamic which was made possible by releasing Android as open source. Kubernetes is an example from the server side. Cloud providers, again, for customers, it's actually quite convenient that there's one Kubernetes which is run by all public cloud providers so that I can switch and I don't have to learn a different container orchestration system when I'm switching providers. There are certainly more examples. I also would be interested in ideas you see here, what might be maybe even better examples how to illustrate this business driver of standardization. So, and another one, and you might debate if that's actually a business model, but donations are a model which quite a number of open source projects use to fund their development or fund a part of their development. I think it's good to treat that as well because business is not always done by companies, but there are also individuals, there are nonprofit organizations involved. And donations are, I think, quite an important part of the open source ecosystem. There we have the business driver of volunteers. So a volunteer organization, they have a really compelling story to ask for donations. Company probably wouldn't go with that and wouldn't be successful with that. But the model here is maybe a little more on the individual level, but it's certainly something which drives an ecosystem where also at least part of the community can make a living from contributing to open source projects. And adoption, of course, again, defines kind of the size of the markets. Examples, Wikipedia is not primarily a software project, but I think they have probably the most visible donation campaign, which is out there in the space. The smaller ones, but still very relevant ones are LibreOffice. They fund not all the development, but they fund the organization and have quite some resources there. Also KDE, a project which is dear to my heart, has surprisingly the last years really built donation campaigns which were much more successful than I would have expected. So maybe it's also something which is underused. you have to ask for donations. I learned to get them. You won't get them just because it would be good for you. And I think many open source projects are hesitant with asking for financial help. There are lots of yeah, I think dynamics there which you might not like or you would prefer to ignore. But then still, it's a nice way if you actually are successful with that. So that's a couple of examples. I think there are a few more in the draft of the guide. So if you're interested in that, look up the document on GitHub. One other aspect we looked at, given we have a business model, we have identified how the business drivers work, how we want to apply them to accelerate that. Then the question is, how do I do that in practice? What does this mean for my open source project? And there we looked at Mozilla's framework for purposeful open source. That's actually a nice document. You might be aware of that. It's a study they did mostly for their own needs. So they have a framework how they run open source projects, how they shape them, what is important there, and they identified these archetypes. And these archetypes actually map quite nicely to this business driver approach, so that we have they define what they call archetype benefits, and they are quite close. They are a bit more fine-grained, but they are quite close to what we defined as business drivers. And from that results an archetype which comes with certain traits, how the project should be organized, how, for example, it should involve community contributions and all that. So the document actually is, I think, a nice way how to transfer this a little bit abstract analysis we try to do here into a practical advice for how to run business projects or how to run open source projects with an impact on business. And yeah, these two slides here just summarize that. I won't go into detail here. You can read that up, or we can just discuss it in detail if you have specific questions. Good. That's kind of the content we already have. So you can read that up. I did one more slide here about a number of questions actually we also discussed. And that's where maybe some interaction between CHAOSS and the working group would be interesting. We are having, we had several discussions about that, but no clear conclusions yet. How we can quantify some of the things we are talking about, how we quantify the business impact of these business drivers, how can we make advice there, how to use them and also track them and how to convert insight there into action. What we do have is, I mean, we have these quite well-known studies. The Linux Foundation has done a lot of them. Others have also done them with this more global view. How valuable is the open source ecosystem? As this famous 8.8 trillion number, which is cited a lot. That's kind of from the consumption point of view of open source. We also just recently, the Linux Foundation released a study about ROI of contributions. There are a couple of others. I think that's also something from a general point of view. I think it's understood, but these numbers are not really helpful to drive action in specific projects. So that's where we are asking ourselves the question, what are the dimensions we can measure? Maybe what is already there, what already is measurable, where maybe there are tools, methodologies, advice, experience, practice, how to do that, and how could that be integrated or used together with the framework we discussed and defined here. And three things I have in mind where I don't have an easy answer is measuring adoption. That's kind of the classical problem for open source project. If you just give your software away without any control, you won't have license keys to count or something like that. So how can we actually measure that? How can we work with that? It's such an important factor in the business models, I think, but it's really hard to quantify in a reliable way. And then we have in theory, of course, there's a very exact number of adoption because you could count computers where the software is installed if you would know them. But then there are also these areas where it's much harder to come up with numbers because it's not as easily countable. Like what is trust? What is public benefit? You can try to convert that into numbers, but public benefit could be measured in cost savings or something, but that's not the full picture. And similar, how do we account for strategic value? Often open source is part of a strategic decision, which is important, but is not yeah, directly measurable. But of course, it has an impact, and some of these business drivers very directly touch the strategic level. So it would be interesting to see how we can come up with more tangible numbers, how to quantify things here. And I'm sure I've forgotten a lot of other things we we could discuss and we need to discuss. So that's it. Yeah, just my email address here. That's what I wanted to show you, and I'm looking forward to our discussion now.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. I've been really interested in what you all are working on. Sadly, your meetings are on Friday, which is my day off, and so I don't come to the meetings. But yeah, I've been really interested to hear what you've all been working on. So I'm curious what other people think. Can you go back to the slide with the questions about metrics? Because that might be interesting. If you have other questions for Cornelius, that's cool too. But yeah, so do you have any questions about the presentation? Do you have any thoughts specifically on the metrics? I'd be curious to hear from some of the other OSPOs.
I would be particularly interested in this adoption question. Does any of you have found a way how to get reliable adoption numbers for open source projects?
I wish. That's a $1 billion question in open source, right? Like we have things we can use as indicators. You can look at so I'm not a fan of like GitHub stars and forks, but you can look at the trajectory to get a sense for whether or not interest in a project is increasing or decreasing. That still doesn't tell you adoption. What a lot of the CNCF projects have started doing is putting in adopters file, like an adopters.md file that people can add themselves to. But that requires somebody actually going to the project, adding themselves to the adopters file. And then there are loads of companies like when I worked at Intel, for example, we didn't tell people when we adopted a project. That was a deliberate decision that was considered confidential. And a lot of companies have a similar take on that. So yeah, adoption's hard. Victor, sorry, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. Oh, first of all, that's a fabulous presentation. Thank you, Cornelius. So one thing that's been discussed in the business value working group is measuring the business value, and this article was shared before. So I think there's an opportunity to create a matrix to measure both the business value as well as the risk, because actually, because I participated in a community called SPDX. So where there's right now we're defining the ontology to measure risk. However, if you talk to the executives like about OSPO, for example, why do we have an OSPO? Why is open source important, right? How do you quantify that? Other than just say, well, we're good, open source is great. I mean, everybody's doing it. How do you quantify it with a number? That's the question. So same thing is happening here. So what we find when discussing in SPDX community is when you quantify it, there are ways to quantify it, both financially, also about like process, etc. And the reason is when it comes to risk, there are two types of risk. At least for security side, mostly we talk about the bad risk, which is the threat, basically security threats. But what's not discussed is the good risk, the opportunity, right? For example, if you have agentic AI, how do you need to take on agentic AI or not? If you talk to a security engineer, the answer is definitely no, because it's not ready. There's so many things that's just too risky, right? However, if you don't do it, but it's a great opportunity to create something new that kind of be kind of a in the future strategic for the company, right? So you have to take on that because it's a good risk. Same thing for business value. When I know there's already a risk profile that could be probably kind of revived, could be combined to create kind of a risk slash business opportunity value matrix. This way, we can the article in this Harvard white paper, it go into a lot of the interesting statistics, right? But the question is, open source community so far has not given them the data yet. How do they know what matrix is needed, right? So I think the first step is collaboration between the business value working group and this chaos working group, and create those matrix, both the business value matrix as well as the risk matrix, covering both good and bad risk. And once we have that, we can reach out to something like this Harvard guys and tell, okay, we have this. So is this something you need? Because there's all the companies have organizations such as GRC for risk management, have strategic initiative, open source, etc. Right? How do they come together to make a quantified adjustment decision on what to do with open source or not, right? So by doing this, we have some solid, quantifiable risk and business value factors, so that the C-level people actually can make decision based on that. I think that's where the value will be for this collaboration.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And in particular, I think the risk angle is something that we need to be thinking about. And we do have kind of a starting point for that with some of the metrics models that Gary developed that we later turned into a practitioner guide, which is about assessing viability. So that's kind of how we look at some of the business risks of adopting open source software, which was one piece that Victor mentioned that I think is maybe a starting point for some of the metrics that might be interesting. And Remy, you dropped a couple of comments in the chat. I don't know if you want to talk about any of those or.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So there are in our OSPO in the public sector, and also within sort of the digital service approach to providing modernization within the public sector, we talk a lot about burden reduction. So anytime that at scale, especially if you have a very large operation, like a government is a very large organization with thousands or millions of people that work within it, even if you can reduce time by, to do a task by a few minutes or hours, you can really see just an enormous amount of burden reduction. You can quantify it in a very straightforward way. So if you look at some of the links that we posted, there's our Share IT Act savings estimation repository that we shared, where we just show like, hey, here's this manual process of adding repository metadata for your open source projects. And if we could automate that, if we estimate on the low end, it takes an hour to fill that out manually. If we can provide a tool that's hosted, that's free, that doesn't cost any money, we can reduce that by 80% to maybe 15 minutes. And then if there's 10,000 repositories at an 80% reduction, that looks like 10,000 hours of time that we're saving annually, which, at this amount of salary rate or contractor rate for people to fill out this metadata, that looks like X number of thousands or millions of dollars each year at just our agency, right? So those kinds of value propositions really resonate, particularly within the public sector, where there's a big focus on doing more with less and, efficiently using taxpayer dollars and resources within the government. That's a big key focus of the administration, not just historically speaking as well. So that's one of the ways that we can sort of demonstrate value, just on directly on what the OSPO does, and then form a more like, okay, well, what have you done with open source besides the OSPO itself? I posted another link in channel that was for our hospital price transparency tool. So basically, hospitals, because of a piece of legislation, hospitals have to provide itemized list of all of their services and how much they cost as a JSON file. And there was no standard in the legislation for how to do that. So our team worked to say, hey, here's a standard for doing it. Here's a tool where you can validate your JSON. And then from that, we were able to say, there are X thousand number of hospitals that have to host this file. If it takes this long to compute it or this long to audit it, how much burden can we reduce? And there's a screenshot of the slide that we presented at the GW OSCON presentation last year to talk about sort of those burden reductions. There's also other metrics like Victor was talking about where we talk significantly about security and continuity risks, and those are relatively straightforward to quantify as well. There was a high profile hack last year for Change Healthcare that cost $2.8 billion and basically brought the entire health insurance industry to a halt for a few weeks or months. So when we say, hey, here are these active security vulnerabilities, and through a bug bounty program for rewarding between $500 and $5,000 per vulnerability, IBM says that it costs on average $10 million per exploited vulnerability times the number of reported bugs that we found. We could spend $100,000 to save a couple hundred million, right? Those kinds of trade-offs are, we're able to point to and say, like, this is based on academic research, or this is based on actual measurement of how long things take to do. And those have been very effective at demonstrating value proposition in the public sector. And I think also would translate pretty easily in the private sector, because these are the same approaches that you would use as a bug bounty program in a private organization, or a burden reduction for a customer experience or a user experience research studies.
I think the burden reduction is an interesting perspective, because that's a way how to quantify things which don't have a price necessarily, and that's something I see sometimes when we are trying to bring open source in business processes, that having a license price of zero kind of breaks the system. So if, for example, purchasing departments are incentivized by negotiating the price and bringing it down, I mean, if you start with zero, there's nothing you can drive down. So your incentive goes out of the window, and you switch to other things. So that's, I think, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. This is a really interesting discussion. So thank you so much for joining us. I will ask if you could add a link to your slides from the notes. That would be fantastic. If you could do that.
I will do
Uh,
that.
yeah, thank you. And with that, we have just one more thing on the agenda. I don't know, Natalia, do you want to share your screen to do this? Do you want me to?
Yes. Give me a second.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. And then let me bring up another. Okay, cool. Hi everyone, I'm Natalia. Last week I did a little presentation and demo to the working group where we talked about archiving repositories, and I just want to share a very exciting and recent update from yesterday. But the tool that we demoed from last week, Repo Sunsetter, we recently shipped a version 1 of the tool, and it has been published to GitHub Action Marketplace. So I'm gonna drop the link in chat. Yeah, so feel free to take a look. Would love to hear your feedback and see if it would be helpful for your organization in terms of archiving and sunsetting your repositories. And then alongside that, based on our work, we added some more content to the CHAOSS Practitioner Guide on Sunsetting Repos, where we elaborated more on preparing repositories for archival. A lot of the content is based on the work that Repo Sunsetter does. So for instance, we talk about updating documentation, doing a security review, reviewing issues, change requests, the repository metadata, and doing some housekeeping before to prepare the repository for review before archival. Yes, so feel free to take a look at the updated practitioner sunset guide as well. Okay, cool. And that is all I had to share. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen briefly again, and we can just talk about upcoming meetings. So we have a few things on the future agenda items section. Travis, since you're on the call, I'm gonna, I guess, kind of put you on the spot. Are you interested in presenting in the next meeting, which is on the 19th?
The 19th, let me just think really quickly about what I'm gonna be doing that day. Yeah, actually, to be honest with you, I'm hosting a friend who's visiting from the United States. So that's gonna be that's not gonna be the best day for me. So, the
Okay.
week after the actually, let me make sure. Sorry,
So it would
I'm
be
entering
the
in a
next
kind of
one
a
would be April 2nd because we do every other week. So it would be April 2nd, which would be the day before the Easter holiday, which
Okay, yeah,
also
yeah.
would be
April
the date.
2nd is good. I don't have anything planned yet, no visitors from out of town. So yeah, I think why don't go ahead and put me down. And the cool thing is I should hopefully have progressed more in my little side quest at work to do all this stuff. So excited to share all that with you all. So
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I think that's going to be really interesting discussion. Maybe we'll reach out to Emma and see if she's available for the next meeting. Any other future agenda items? So are there other things that we want to talk about in this meeting that we should add to the future agenda items section? This makes it easier for us co-chairs to try and decide what to put on the agenda for the next meeting if we get some suggestions from people. So if you have any suggestions now, that's totally cool. You can also drop suggestions in the Slack channel. Victor, go ahead.
Yeah, just a mode of collaboration. I know this is not something that we're going to expect to do in a few weeks even, right? It's going to be a long-term thing. But so between the meetings, obviously offline on the Slack probably will be the best way to continue the discussion. So well, we in the business value meeting, we do have a biweekly meeting there as well. So what do you think is the from perspective of people in this group, what is the best way to collaborate on this topic?
Do other people have thoughts on this?
Possibility is the Harvard paper authors, people like because when we're talking about both risk and business value, it's usually part of corporate governance, including GRC, definitely somebody for example, measuring the effectiveness and of OSPO. That must be somebody in the company must be calculating that. So maybe like in the HB Harvard case, any authors that have publication regarding this, I think we can invite to either one, either Hero in the business value meeting, whichever you feel proper to discuss about both business value and risk. How do they quantify? Because they have the formula, right? We provide them with a matrix, but what kind of matrix they're missing? I think that's the proper question too. Instead of we create something and they say, okay, no, this is not what I need. Maybe we should reach out to say, what do you think is missing? What kind of a question mark for you when you're doing this calculation? You're probably assuming something that you don't know. Maybe we can actually give you that clear matrix that you need to make those calculations.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I think that some of that collaboration can happen in the Slack channel. So we have so the main Slack channel for this working group is the one in the CHAOSS Slack. So it's the WG OSPO Slack channel. So I think that would probably be, I would say, maybe the best place to start some of those discussions. And then I do, like you said, really want to continue this collaboration between the two working groups. So I think certainly when you all have something new, something you're working on, maybe some questions about metrics, I would say that we can, continue to bring these onto the agenda as well. So I would say, don't hesitate to ask to put stuff on the agenda. And that goes for everybody. So just a reminder, like the chairs try to make sure that we have an agenda, but anyone can add anything to the agenda. And we'll cover as much as we possibly can in the time we have. So don't hesitate to just throw things on the agenda if there's something that you wanna discuss. So I would really love to keep that collaboration open.
For that, I don't want to speak on behalf of Cornelius. He done a great, wonderful job covering much more than before. A lot of improvement. So Augustine also in that group has some additional business value idea. So maybe Cornelius, maybe we can create some initial matrix based on your slide, etc. That's business value and maybe risk as well, so that we can have the initial list in a like a Google Doc, and then we can share with the matrix CHAOSS matrix community, and then you can take a review, and then once we have a initial list of both business value slash business risk of open source ready, then maybe we can reach out to, for example, the Harvard paper authors, for example, to come and take a look and present their idea and see, are we on the right track?
Yeah, I think that would be great. So let me know when you all are ready to do that. So we're basically out of time. I saw a note in the Slack channel to maybe add recaps for conferences. So Scale and FOSS Backstage will have happened by the time we meet again. So maybe we'll do some recaps for those. Just a couple of reminders. Open Chain and Friends is at the end of March in Stuttgart. If you're interested in attending that one. ASF's Community Over Code is in October in Glasgow, and the CFP deadline is March 20th. So if you want to give a talk there, now's the time. Same thing with All Things Open. It's in October again, but in Raleigh, and the CFP deadline is the end of March. So if you're interested in submitting some talks, those are good opportunities. There is also an OSPO virtual conference on April 9th that's being put together by Rachel at Punch Tape. And so that looks like it's also going to be a really interesting event. Sadly, I'll be off in April, so I won't be there for that one, but I think that's going to be really interesting. So with that, we are totally out of time. So thank you all for coming. This is a really interesting session. And so yeah, so thanks everybody and have a good day/evening, depending on where you are.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a great vacation, Don.
Yeah, thank you so much.